Hey, remember when pretty much everyone on the internet was talking about Szechuan sauce for some reason? It wasn't that long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years now, that seemingly every meme and every joke was about this random, discontinued McDonald's sauce packet. Well, if you aren't a Rick and Morty fan, then that might have been a little confusing, if not very random. But for fans of the show, they were simply enjoying one of the funniest gags in television history. It was almost like an inside joke that only Rick and Morty fans were in on. Coincidentally, that happens to be a heck ton of people. Rick and Morty fans don't always get the best rap either. And why is that? Does the show just naturally appeal to a more problematic audience?
You gotta get Swifty.
Or is there something deeper at play here? As much as it's a long-standing joke and cliche at this point, Rick and Morty actually is a very intelligent show, especially when you compare it to some of the other silly and potentially edgy cartoons. Take Family Guy, for example. Sure, it's a funny show and there are definitely some hilarious jokes, but has the show ever really made you think? Has King of the Hill ever made you question your morals or beliefs? I kind of doubt it. Well, actually, no, maybe King of the Hill, yeah. While there are certainly other brilliantly made cartoons out there, Rick and Morty stands out as different. Take South Park, for example. Nobody would ever dare call that show anything short of genius, but their genius lies in the ability to poke fun. They make social commentary that others are afraid to, and they do it in a way that's actually original and hilarious, so they're able to get away with it. If the show was bad, it would be scrutinized to no end, but it's good. It's clever, it's different, it's funny, so they can take the stances that they take and make fun of the things that they make fun of. Rick and Morty is an entirely different beast. This show is almost challenging its viewer. Rather than challenge mainstream popular culture by taking shots at celebrities, giving a twist on a trending real-world story, Rick and Morty opts to dive deep into our own brains. It forces people to question things they otherwise don't think about in any given ordinary day. Topics like morality and philosophical questions and discussions. And like South Park, it can do that for one simple reason. It's good. The show is so original and funny and off the wall that it could put its audience in these uncomfortable situations and expose them to these difficult scenarios. Because at the end of the day, it can also make them laugh. Humor is the greatest Trojan horse to ever exist. People watch Rick and Morty and don't realize that they're actually being forced to think about important things, mostly because they're laughing and enjoying the silliness. It makes for quite the fascinating watching experience, and it's unlike anything else being broadcasted today. This is why its viewers are so gung-ho about the show that they love. It makes them think, and thinking typically makes a person feel smart, regardless of whether or not they are smart. So, in turn, because the internet is a random free-for-all of comments and thoughts, people sometimes like to show off just how smart they are. And it is human nature for others to dislike the things that everyone else likes. It's an unfortunate truth, but that's just a fact. For example, Scarface is, for all intents and purposes, a great movie. However, over the decades of people bragging about how good it is, it's sort of become a cringy thing to say you're a fan of. You're almost not allowed to admit that you enjoy something that many other people also enjoy. And a lot of the animosity towards the Rick and Morty fanbase probably suffers from the same thing. Hopefully this video helps people understand exactly what this show is, though. Is it just a silly cartoon? Is it just a cheap parody of Back to the Future? Is it just catering to nihilism and everyone's darkest thoughts? Well, all of that is kinda true, but also it's a brilliantly made, fantastic show that's full of hilarity and realness. It deals with very thoughtful events and predicaments in a way that nobody else is really able to.
Oh my god.
So let's break it down for the uninitiated. The show revolves around the adventures of the Smith family, which consists of parents Beth and Jerry, their 2 children Summer and Morty, and Beth's genius yet morally corrupt father, Rick Sanchez. Rick lives with the family after years of being absent. Now he toils away performing experiments and inventing devices in the family garage. The rest of the family often gets pulled into his hijinks, especially Morty. While the family lives in a quiet suburb in a normal town, the events of the show often take place across an infinite number of alternate realities through time and space. Yeah, that took a sharp turn, I know. With the help of Rick's portal gun, flying car, and numerous other creations, he and his sidekick Morty end up in a limitless number of sticky situations. When you have access to space and time, a lot can happen. I don't know why I said that with such conviction, but I just feel like you gotta know that if you have all those things, and you have access to space and time, you're going for it. So let's talk about these characters a bit more, so that you understand exactly who the show is about. Rick Sanchez, father to Beth and grandfather to Summer and Morty, is a bona fide genius scientist who also happens to be completely and utterly reckless. His alcoholism and nihilistic tendencies are a major source of concern. He's one of the most fascinating protagonists because he's a truly terrible person. He's just awful, which makes it hard to make an entire show where he's one of the main characters. It's also easier to base your concept around someone likable who can be endearing to the audience and someone that they would want to root for. He's a troubled man with some major issues, including a drinking problem, a total lack of humility and self-awareness, whose ego is completely out of control and acts selfishly 100% of the time. Yet, that's who we come back to root for every single episode. Maybe it's because of his relationship with the show's other main character, Morty Smith. After all, Morty is riddled with insecurities. I mean, anybody would be nervous when faced with the kind of situations that Morty is consistently tossed into, often against his will. So in a way, audiences are more likely to relate to Morty. His confidence is abysmal, which almost makes him all the more endearing to viewers. On the one hand, we have this mad genius with the ability to think up anything. We see the psychological toll that much power can have on a person, and how it might not necessarily be a good thing to be so gifted. When looked at that way, you can almost feel for the guy. And on the other hand, we have this very regular, very normal boy who's expected to somehow handle all the same things his grandfather can. It's impossible to expect a typical 14-year-old to be able to do that. And that is where the entire conflict and resolution of this show lies. That's the story that gets everyone hooked. We're tuning in to see Morty go up against the odds being his counterpart, his genius grandfather Rick. We know that Rick has no ceiling on his potential, but to witness a clumsy, awkward teenager trying to succeed under the same conditions? Now that's good television. That's something we can get behind. That's something we can root for. That's why it feels so good when every episode wraps up and they've either saved the day or avoided some kind of life-threatening dilemma. Things work out in the end, like most episodic TV shows do, so that things can reset and be back to normal by the following episode. And we're relieved because Morty managed to survive another adventure. Those two aren't the only characters that matter, though. While the name of the show only features Rick and Morty, the rest of the Smith family actually plays a massive part in the plot. For starters, there's Morty's older sister, Summer. She, too, is a relatable teenager, just in a different kind of way. Unlike Morty's timid anxiety, Summer is the kind of kid whose insecurities lead her to act out aggressively. She's relatable because she longs to be popular. She gets annoyed by her crazy family and seems to need validation. Those are all things that the majority of people can relate to in some capacity. I'm not trying to call you insecure here, but you get what I'm saying. Summer resents the environment she lives in, which is due in large part to her parents, Beth and Jerry. Beth is the daughter of Rick, and her personal issues lead her to put her problematic father on a pedestal. She's a normal woman, living a normal suburban life and working as a veterinary surgeon. Only she's burdened with the paranormal antics of her father and son. The juxtaposition of her very relatable and real-life marriage issues and the way she deals with a heavy dose of psychological trauma, all set against the backdrop of silly, unbelievable, multi-reality science fiction stories. It's pretty funny and pretty genius. She's a totally normal person, with normal problems like a superiority complex and abandonment issues. Only sometimes she gets dragged into outer space, or some other crazy stuff will happen. It almost makes the audience wonder which part of the show are they truly a fan of. The deep, interesting interpersonal dynamics, or the zany outer space sci-fi antics. The same could also be said for Jerry Smith, Beth's husband. He's also a pretty regular guy. Jerry's biggest struggle is with the dynamic between his wife and her father. Rick is always Beth's top priority, and he feels like he comes in second place to her, which isn't a healthy dynamic for a marriage to have. So Jerry feels challenged, and Jerry feels threatened by Rick, and that causes quite a lot of psychological issues. Again, all of this complicated web of emotions displayed in a show that's essentially a Doc and Marty spoof is really, really cool. Oh, and in terms of other characters, there's also this guy named Scary Terry who haunts people's nightmares, but you'll just have to watch the show to get a full understanding of him, because he's got many layers, that Terry. So you're probably asking yourself, what kind of individual could have come up with all this? And the answer is two guys. Dan Harmon, who you may know as the brains behind the show Community, and Justin Roiland, who was involved in shows like Adventure Time and Gravity Falls. Roiland also does a bunch of the voices for the show, including both Rick and Morty. His ad-lib style of doing the voice acting is a major component of the show's tone and feel. And the pair not only co-created the series, but they continue to write it and produce it.
I'm Dan.
I'm Justin.
Together we created
Rick and Morty!
It all started when the two met each other at Channel 101, a non-profit monthly short film festival in Los Angeles that Dan Harmon actually co-founded. Participants could submit a short film in the format of a pilot, and then a live audience decides which entry should continue and be turned into a series. Roiland would consistently enter the Channel 101 festival, earning a reputation as someone who created shock value humor. His stuff would often come off twisted, which would lead to mixed reactions with audiences. Dan Harmon liked it, though. And within the context of the video, that's the only thing that really matters right now. In 2006, Roiland started creating a series of animated shorts specifically for Channel 101 called The Real Animated Adventures of Doc and Marty, spelled M-H-A-R-T-I. And we'll put it on the screen for you there. There you go. It was a full-blown parody of Doc Brown and Marty McFly from Back to the Future, only animated and infinitely more vulgar. He kept making new episodes as the pilot eventually drifted away from being such a rip-off of something else, started turning into its own unique thing. In 2012, after Harmon was briefly fired from Community, Adult Swim approached him looking to create a new primetime hit show. He was skeptical at first, not sure if he would fit in with the Adult Swim style, and having never really worked in animation before. Plus, Harmon didn't really have any ideas that he thought would work for this. That's where Roiland enters the equation. Harmon brought him in, knowing that Roiland had a brilliant idea. They took the Doc and Marty premise and renamed them Rick and Morty. They slightly tweaked their dynamic, added some layers to the show, like the rest of the family, and the fact that Rick and Morty would be grandfather and grandson. And Rick and Morty, the show, was born. The style of the show, and specifically the show's sense of humor, is a direct reflection of Roiland and Harmon, its creators. They both veer towards a darker way of expressing themselves, finding humor in some pretty nihilistic and depressing subject matter. After all, that's what makes for the best humor. Comedy is the ability to point out a problem, or something bad, and laugh in the face of it. It's about finding light inside of dark. That's essentially the formula for comedy, so write it down, keep it. It's like math. And if you practice the math, then you could be a comedian. What makes the show so hilarious is how it manages to juggle two completely opposing dynamics. On the one hand, we're watching a dysfunctional family being torn apart by a selfish alcoholic. If that isn't real-world drama, then I don't know what is. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we've got this silly Back to the Future style dynamic, where a grandfather and his grandson travel through space and time, getting themselves out of countless sticky situations. The balance between the family life stuff and the heavy science fiction stuff is where the genius of the show lies. As much as Rick is arguably the main character of the show, we tend to watch it through Morty's lens. After all, we can't really relate to Rick, and we don't really think like him. He's entertaining to observe, but Morty is the really interesting one. Take the show Lost, for example. The character Hurley wasn't the main character, but he was probably the most endearing to the audience because he had the most realistic and relatable personality. So we kind of watched the show through his perspective. We agreed for the most part with who he trusted, what he was weary of, and how he perceived things. The same could be said for Morty. We feel for the kid. Because his life is far from easy, it's hard in a way that we can understand. I mean, other than the alternate reality hijinks he gets dragged into, we all know the feeling of having to do something we don't want to do, or feeling pressure that we don't know how to say no to. Roiland and Harmon also do a masterful job making the show self-aware. Numerous times throughout the series, a character will acknowledge the plot of the episode or break the fourth wall and let it slip that they're in a TV show.
In many ways, things will be like season 1.
This is most common when poking fun at tired, regurgitated television tropes. The show loves taking decades of rehashed storylines and plot devices that we've seen time and time again across countless programs, and doing it in such a way that it's aware of it. Like I mentioned before, the show also has a tendency to take things into a deep philosophical place, which is something that not a lot of cartoons are able to do. There's often a heaviness to Rick and Morty. It's been described as a never-ending fart joke wrapped around a studied look into nihilism. That's heavy. They consistently tackle some pretty serious subject matter, addressing the insignificance of human existence and our place within a massive infinite universe. The characters in the show are constantly facing cosmic horrors or some kind of existential dread, learning the hard way that ignorance is bliss. Rick is such a troubled individual because he knows the most. In fact, the show posits that the key to true happiness is knowing as little as possible. Rick wants others to share in his misery, so he drags his family into his reality. I mean, you'd go crazy too if you learned everything that there is to learn, only to realize that it ultimately gets you nowhere. Man, that's deep. They also develop alternate ways of coping with the harsh truth that nothing matters. Rick turns to boozing and reckless behavior. Jerry gets by using an unhealthy denial. Beth relies on her obsession with her father, while Summer and Morty are left to sort themselves out. In a way, those two are the healthiest of the main characters, because they've somewhat given up and accepted their fate. In a way, Morty represents the difference between nihilism and existentialism. Nihilism is the concept that nothing matters, so why bother? Existentialism, though, is the concept that nothing matters except for what matters to you. Morty being exposed to his grandfather's nihilistic outlook has only helped build his confidence. Since nothing matters, you can either let that defeat you, or use it as motivation to take control of your own life and decide what matters. Morty's almost a triumphant character in that sense. Hey, go Morty! In only 4 seasons, Rick and Morty has managed to climb up the popular culture ranks and become a staple to legions of fans. There are now comic books, video games, tabletop games, merchandise, and even music. Let's not forget that successful app, Pocket Mortys. That thing is incredibly addictive. It's pretty much Pokemon, but with Morty. The show is a massive hit, and with good reason. So what do you guys think? Will you give it a shot? Or if you've already seen it, will you watch it with a slightly different lens now? Drop a comment in the section below letting us know how you feel about Rick and Morty. Before you go, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also hit the notification button. And that way YouTube's going to let you know when we've got new videos just like this one. If you're on mobile, just go into your YouTube settings, turn on the mobile notifications. Also, we'd really appreciate it if you hit the thumbs up right there under the video. And that's it for asking you to do things, because by watching this whole video, you've already done quite a lot. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.